Good morning, everyone. Great to see so many of you back this morning. And because usually academic gatherings are very theoretical, and that's why we're especially happy to welcome this morning the Weaving Realities Arts Collective, which are Teresa Diaz-Nerio, Yuchen Li, and Aldo Esparza Ramos, who are joining us this morning. Their art and their intention is set around senti passar, which is thinking through feeling, and Aramis already referred to that yesterday in his introduction. They perform through the concept of practical decolonization, which aims to re-educate us all into living in harmony with each other and with nature. And I think we've already talked quite a lot about that yesterday, also during the book launch. Because currently, as consumers, we are very, very much disconnected from the origins of the products we consume. And unsurprisingly, and again, that came up in discussion yesterday several times, we face a massive destruction of resources, of human lives, of nature, of living and non-living beings. So in a sense, we are all complicit in that, but is there an alternative? And obviously the question of alternative, is there an alternative? And I think we all agree that there is, but the question is, what are the alternatives? So we very much look forward now to your performance, which has the title, Making Chillet, Food and Ancestrality. So please, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hi, we are Weaving Realities. We're based in Amsterdam, and we prepared a little self-introduction, but I think Julia already mentioned a lot. Today we are going to do a participatory performance themed around food and ancestrality. Can you all hear me? Do I need to? Okay. So what you can expect from today's session is that we're going to make two indigenous recipes, one from Mexico, one from Dominican Republic. And now Teresa can speak more about it.
The recipe for chocolate is chilate, and which is chilate because it comes from indigenous community in Mexico. And it's very special. It has cacao and it has rice. Rice is a mixture. It's brought by the African slave that mix it with indigenous, and it's a completely different way of making it and drinking it.
And the arepitas is a dish made with corn, and it's also from the indigenous people of the Dominican Republic, the Taínos, but it has other elements that are sugar, which came also with the Spaniards, and it has milk, but I'm using oat milk and eggs. But I use everything organic because that's one of the points that we will be talking a little bit about.
When I roast a bit of cacao, I will also go quickly through the history of chocolate in different moments of time. This is the fruit of cacao. No? This comes from, I would say, Ayayala, which is the name of America before being renamed by Europeans. No? But it's a very different relation with the land. So cacao is a medium-sized tree that comes from 3 to 5 meters, and it's a shadow tree. So it needs even taller trees to grow. No? And in Aviala, this cacao comes from a very dynamic way. It needs another trees, it needs other plants, it needs other insects in order to grow. And it's, I believe, where nature grows on team instead of incompetence. It is something that they call co-crianza, no? It's a relation with food that, together with corn and other crops and tomatoes and stuff, with its, the relation is like having children, like we procreate them, but they also educate us back, you know, it's something relation. We are made of them and they are made of us, and it's really a relational approach, you know. Cacao has more than 5,000 years of history in America before us, no? And in these 5,000, because it comes in shadow, because of the way it's shaped, in the Popol Vuh, like it's like the Bible of the Mayans and the Olmecs and the Toltecs, it says that our blood is made of cacao, and our flesh, our body is made out of corn, no? So, because cacao is also shadow, it represents like death. It's like the food of the afterlife for the spirit. It's like it represents death, but not in the way we know it, but in the way of life under shadow. And corn is life. It is a sunny plant. It grows. It lasts 1 year. It grows in full sunshine. You know? And this is our flesh. It's life and death. You know? And together it's like a reconnection with the soul. They were growing cacao in agroforestry with vanilla, with corn, with tomato. No, but when the Spanish arrived, they didn't want to recognize this way of growing it because it was an insult to the mathematical eye of modern man. No? It needed to be like a monoculture, a monoculture, in order to be agriculture. They only saw savages that go inside of the forest and bring out with this kind of fruit. No? But it was until 2012 that this was recognized as agroforestry. No? Very delicate way of growing it, working with nature. No? So. Inside this, there are from 12 to 24 beans of cacao. Just at the last, when the Spanish arrived, the Aztecs already had cacao so precious that it had as a currency, as money. They wanted to give the Spanish to pay back the tribute that they had to pay because of their colonization of their to pay, even when they were like being tortured and born because they didn't know God, they needed to pay back the tribute. They were trying to pay with this, and the Spanish didn't allow it because they could not accumulate this. So it had you cannot really accumulate this, but then, it was very different, the money. It was not like accumulation. The Spanish wanted gold, wanted silver, wanted something that they can really store and send back and then really keep for generations and generations. And if you keep this for a year or two, it already the moths come in and take it away. So you needed to know in advance what you're going to do with the cacao before you actually get it, before you sell something. It was really expensive. The Spanish just took all the meaning, all the traditions, all the history of it, and they just extract this to Europe. You know? And when it was more popular, they were exchanging this for slaves. This 200 grams of cacao was enough to buy one African slave from the Dutch ships. You know? So the Spanish were buying these slaves in the Caribbean because there was a huge genocide, there was a huge demographic catastrophe. All the natives were dying because of sicknesses, war, the fall of the economy. You know? And they had lands, but now they needed more people. So the Dutch were living with empty ships, and then going to Africa, taking some people, and then going to the Caribbean, exchanging for sugar, for cocoa, and other things. No? So this is the way we know it. It was at first very expensive. Only the really rich, the kings, they could afford to have this. No? Even Casanova was using this chocolate, no, for his on his practices, no? But it was not because is it aphrodisiac or so efficient, no? But it was because it's so expensive, what it means, like a very expensive champagne. But then it kept on going like this until Industrial Revolution. Then we have Fry. Fry is an English Quaker, very religious, who knew the properties of chocolate. He knew that it was antidepressing, it was anti-hysteria, it was energizing, It was very medicinal. He was a pharmaceutic. He knew all about it. But his goal was to sell it to children. And that was something that was not done before. No? He wanted to sell it to children, but also to make an utopia out of it, an industrial utopia. So he was bringing people from the countryside to these industrial cities where they have bars, they have restaurants, they have theaters, they have all kinds of entertainment, they have like the celebrities of the moment they were coming to this town. This town is in Bristol, in England, But then the cacao was still expensive, right? This was the way of doing it. It was the same simple process, always like roasting it, grinding it, then putting it in molds, and then making bar of chocolate. First he did bars of chocolate, but was not that successful in that moment. So he went on with, first the way to bring cacao, that was the difficult part, to make it cheaper. And that's when it took, the Netherlands brought it to the colonies in the Dutch East Indies, then England to Africa, to Ivory Coast, Belgium to Congo, and then the prices of cacao dropped drastically. Then the way of bringing the cacao is to open the fruit, then to dry it and transport it, like kilometers of it. And then this was when slavery was solid, when slavery and all this kind of was so normalized. It was even in the publicities, in the propaganda. This is when Zwarte Piet came into the Dutch traditions, and this was the way of getting so much cacao, to make it cheaper. And then what Fries did is the Eastern chocolate, chocolate egg. So he took one thing that it was already familiar to people, this religion symbol, that is like the renewal of life, that is a promise of the afterlife, where children just painted the eggs and they hide them. So this guy took this product coming from colonization, coming from taking of lands for mass slavery and genocide, and put it into the heart of this religion tradition and give it to children, already painted. They don't even have to worry about painting them. But in America, in the early 1900s, it happened the same. They also did like this. They have also chocolate town, which is Hershey's. It's in Pennsylvania, and they were also like doing this machinery and utopia in order to give it to children. But they took Cuba and they took some countries in Central America in order to produce this chocolate, also through colonies, basically. This is a utopia of Hershey's. It's like huge factory, They have also celebrities, big houses, the very big street, even an amusement park. That it's still working. Both of them still are working. Price became Cadbury's, and it's still working as a very big chocolaterie in the United States. What Hershey's was doing was not what it was doing chocolate, a bar of chocolate like this, that it was a perfect war chocolate. So the soldiers can keep it in their pocket, they can go on the front, and they can just eat it at any time. But then when it was during the Second World War, so Hershey's was producing this chocolate for the Allies, for France, for England, And then when they come to the European towns, the American soldiers, they take a little bit of chocolate and hey, here, freedom and democracy. It was just a little taste of freedom and democracy. But not for Cubans, not for Latin Americans, just for Europeans, And it was so much as a propaganda that they were leaving tons of chocolate during the Cold War, after the Second War was finished in Berlin. They have the Soviet Union, and you have this guy that they were throwing chocolate, tons of chocolate with parachutes, you know, over the Soviet Union and other countries, no? So this is a perfect metaphor for me that until now we still having chocolate that falls from the sky. If we want chocolate, we can only get it in the nearest supermarket. We can find all kinds of presentations and stuff, but all of them are mass-produced, empty of meaning, you know, without only ready for being consumed. No? You can just choose different tastes and stuff, but everything comes from the sky. No? And there are many people who are trying to make like organic and fair trade, but if we don't change our way of consuming, this is happening. So this is the map now, like the consumers and the producers, no? And then the biggest consumer is Europe by far, and the biggest producer is Ivory Coast. No? So still basically the same. No? But then, what happened in Ivory Coast? If we go closer, this is in 1990, and then this is in 2015. So in these years, in these 15 years, it lost 90% of the forest. You know, it is basically, all this is biodiverse forest, and this is basically gone. And what is important here is that these two green areas, here and here, these are ecological reserves. They are animal sanctuaries that are protecting for elephants and chimpanzees and other kind of stuff. But it's illegal to grow cacao there. It's illegal to do farming there. But even so, half of it already disappeared. And it's bought legally by European companies. And they arrive directly to Amsterdam. Amsterdam is the biggest import and export of raw cacao beans like this. And then they sell it to Belgium, to Germany, to France, and then it becomes Swiss chocolate, Belgian chocolate, and it has anything to do with this. And that's without mentioning like child labor and human trafficking, you know, that it's also really known there. This cacao, well, I like this quote from Floriberto Diaz, who is a thinker from Ayala, who says, yeah, we need to exploit the earth, we need to finish it, we need to consume it in order to be happy. We are happy just because as much we consume earth, as more happy we are. As more exotic food we have, as more clothes, as more telephones, as more traveling, as more we consume, we are. And this is more happy we are, no? But this is a different way of thinking. In Ayala, in La Realidad, there are still communities that don't have this relation to it, don't have this relation to that. No? And this is where this cocoa comes from. La Realidad is a place that doesn't appear in Google Maps because Google Maps is not allowed to get in. They are an autonomous land, and they make it autonomous from themselves. It's surrounded by the Mexican army, but they still fighting with everything, not to protect only themselves, but they don't want like the mineries, these destructive mineries that kill the rivers and kill the forest. They don't want transgenics, you know, they don't want to, these are ancestral things. These are ancestral things that took generations and generations and generations to reach the point that they are there, you know, in co-crianza, together with the people. And then Monsanto comes and no, we want this transgenic cacao, we want this transgenic corn, you know, and then to grow this and to sell it is actually illegal. This cacao, these people and this cacao are illegal. They don't have identity. They are not Mexicans because they were not born in the proper ways, with the proper documents, in the proper system. So this cacao, I have to smuggle it out in order to bring it, you know? So we are looking this an alternative that we feed, not an utopia that like the ones before that are only destroying and consuming the earth, but an utopia that protects the forest, the trees, the rivers, you know. In this utopia, well, it is La Realidad in this town. They have electricity only from 7 p.m. for 10 p.m. And they don't have roads, but not because they cannot have it because they don't want to have it. They don't want to lose their autonomy. They don't want to lose their way of living, their traditions. And that's the way of doing it. And I don't want to create just another bar of chocolate, another in the way we know it, but that we really work with it, we really taste it, we really try it and experiment, we really get related to it. Yeah. Well, I close with this quote that it says, "We are just a thread in the infinite knitted fabric of reality." That's one quote that I wrote in this town.
Rice, millet, rice. I don't need to read books. I do not need to read books to know about rice. It is already inside me. It is inside the body of my father. It is inside the body of my mother. It is inside the body of my grandparents and the grandparents of my grandparents. Rice is my ancestor. When I first came to Europe, of course, I went to the supermarket to buy rice. And I was so shocked to find this tiny little box of rice on the rack. And for me, I'm so confused because that's not even enough for my family for one single day. In China, we make rice, we order rice like 20 kilograms, 30 kilograms at a time. And in my kitchen, there is a big tank in the kitchen, just for rice. And when the rice is delivered, we fill it up in the tank, and we feel so settled. Everything can be made of rice in China. Rice noodles, rice cake, rice bread, rice flour, rice sugar, rice syrup, rice paper, rice glue, everything. And even our festivals and calendar also is about rice plantation. Our calendar follows the moon, because the moon would tell us when to plant the seeds of rice, when to take extra care of the irrigation, and when to harvest the rice. Rice is our life. There are so many sayings about rice in Chinese. If we want to say something is a done deal, we say the rice has been cooked. We also say do not bow to 5 buckets of rice, because even if it's so precious, you have to stick to your principle. And if someone says to you, I've eaten more rice I've eaten more salt than you've eaten rice, that means this person has outlived you so much, and you'd better listen to his word of wisdom. And how are you is a Western invention. We don't ever ask, how are you, 你好吗? That doesn't exist. We ask, instead of how are you, we ask, have you eaten rice? 你吃饭了吗? Rice is our god. The ancient governors of China they always speak of rice, they always speak of society as 江山社稷. River, mountain, soil, rice. These are our everything. Without river, without mountain, without soil, without rice, how can I even be here to do this, to practice art? That would be really insane. When my grandfather was a teenager, he experienced the most severe famine in Chinese history. Till now, the government hasn't revealed how many people really died because they didn't dare to. As the second eldest son of the family, he went out to 7 villages one day. 7 villages, family by family, door by door. He was trying to ask for a little bit of rice. 7 villages. It took him 1 day and 1 night. He came home really, really late that night. And the whole family was sitting around. The bowls are empty, waiting for him. He didn't get anything. He didn't get anything. The next day, 2 daughters of the family, 2 younger sisters of my grandfather, was brought to the rich family in the town. In exchange, they got 2 bags of sweet potato peels. Later in the famine, my grandfather has to leave the family. He came from the southern province to the He came from the northern province to the southern province to look for his uncle to get a job. And he wrote letters back home saying that this is heaven where I am now. I can eat rice 3 meals a day, every single day. And he never left. So this southern province is where my father was born, is where I was born. My grandfather is 85 now, and in his life he cherished all the things, all the objects, all the materials so much. I don't ever remember him throwing away anything. He is like a designer or inventor or an artist. He can turn a football into a hat. He used plastics to make sheets, to make cover for the cushion. Nothing comes out of gets thrown away from his house. And I think my grandfather really understands rice. He really understands rice. Do I understand? Do I understand? When the neighbors in Yemen picking up guns to shoot at each other in order to fight to get control of some water wells. And I go to a supermarket buying the apples that were transported in tons of waters because they don't want to get bruised. Do I understand? Do I understand rice? When the fishermen from Somalia were forced into being pirates. And people starving off the shore because of the industrial trawlers. And I can go into a sushi restaurant and eat all you can eat sushi buffet here in Europe. Do I understand? Do I understand rice? What do I do when the Amazon fire is still burning and I still just had a soya milk with muesli for breakfast? Do I understand rice? Thank you.
One of our points of reference is the Essene, the Zapatista Army of National Liberation, that went public in Chiapas, Mexico, the same day as the Nafta, North American Free Trade Agreement, the 1st of January 1994, in opposition to these trading policies which left many farmers jobless around Mexico and intensified the industry of the maquilas, where millions of women work for insignificant or very little pay. So the Nafta, the North American Free Trade Agreement, is an agreement by the government of Canada, Mexico, and the United States, creating a trilateral trade bloc in North America. The agreement came into force, exactly as I mentioned, in January 1st, 1994. So what this means is that this free trade agreement will eliminate tariffs, import quotas, and preferences on most, if not all, goods and services traded between them. The fact that I'm mentioning the Nafta is because, sorry, one? No. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. I don't like microphones. So the fact that I'm mentioning the Nafta and the Zapatistas and the maquilas, these industrial parks in Mexico, like for example in Ciudad Juarez, is because of the corn. And also I made a recipe with organic corn, but I will mention there is, because of the Nafta, corn has been domesticated in Mexico already from 9,000 years ago. And Mexico has, of course, the huge variety of different types of corn that they grow in their own way, like Aldo said in Concrianza, most of the people. And what the North Americans did with the Nafta was to sell to Mexico this GMO corn, this transgenic corn. And what this does is basically destroy the Mexican market for farmers. So a lot of women had to go to work in these industrial parks. Indigenous women, like young indigenous women, had to go to work in this industrial park in Ciudad Juarez that is close to the border with Mexico. Also, it's one of the reasons why a lot of Mexican and Central Americans are going to the US to look for a better life, jobs. So I want to show the relationship between, like genocide and the destruction of nature and plants and of the culture just through a simple treaty like this trade agreement that seems to be very liberal. It's very liberal, of course. It's very, we all free, we can all sell and buy, but what does it mean for the people who are facing it? So, her body is a battlefield. Life in the maquiladoras of Juarez. There are over 3,000 maquiladoras in Mexico. Juarez. Juarez, like many of its sister border towns, is home to numerous industrial parks where factories dominate the landscape. In Spanish, these industrial parks are known as maquiladoras, a word that originally referred to millers who kept a part of the flour as payment for grinding wheat, and is loosely translated as places for making industrial products. Maquiladoras were the result of a 1965 program designed to open up trade markets between the US and Mexico. The advent of Nafta exploded the number of Mexican maquiladoras with the idea that Mexico's economy would flourish with the influx of new jobs and with it, Mexico's workers. Despite their peaceful and prosperous-sounding origins, however, the maquiladoras have proved to be anything but a blessing for the women who work in them. Murders, conditions in the maquiladoras. As previously discussed, arguably the most horrific manifestation of global market causalities are the unceasing murders of the women of Juarez. The correlation between the advent of the maquiladora and the Juarez murders is undeniable. While violence has always been the backdrop to the Juarez landscape, the number of murdered women skyrocketed in the early 1990s, coinciding with the arrival of the maquiladoras. The murdered women shared several characteristics. They were young, pretty, and for the most part, employed by the maquiladoras. Many disappeared on their way to and from work at the maquiladoras, setting off early in the morning or late at night through the dark streets of the makeshift neighborhoods surrounding the industrial parks or waiting for unpredictable city buses on lonely comers. Most of them were found raped, beaten, tortured, mutilated, and dead in the scorching desert surrounding Juarez. The murders are brutal, and the numbers are nearly incomprehensible. Population-wise, Juarez is roughly the size of Philadelphia, which is the 5th largest city in the United States. If for more than a decade, nearly 40 young women a year were savagely beaten and killed on their way from work in Philadelphia, it may be safe to assume that the public outcry will spur a resolution to the mystery. But in Juarez, the murders are far from being explained or stopped, and sadly, the murders are but one facet of a maquiladora worker's world. Wages. Nafta's promise of economic independence has not materialized for the citizens employed by American corporations operating in Mexico. Although it is difficult to determine exactly how much maquiladora workers are paid, estimates range from somewhere between $3 and $5 per day. In fact, literature available to potential investors in maquiladoras assures them that workers are typically paid less than $1 an hour, making operations cheap and profit substantial. North Americans often justify the unconscionable low wages in the maquiladoras by pointing to the low cost of living in Mexico. However, wages are just a hair above starvation level. Particularly in border towns, the cost of living has increased to the point where it is on par with the cost of living in America. Thus, along the border in Mexico, it takes a woman 8 hours to earn enough to buy a kilogram of beef, 4 hours for a kilogram of beans, and between 1 and 3 hours to earn enough money for a day's round-trip bus fare, perhaps explaining in part why so many Juarez murdered women were walking alone in the dark morning hours to work rather than taking the bus. Since the average work shift in a maquiladora ranges from between 9 and 13 hours a day, 1 kilogram of beef is almost a full day's wages. In order to survive, it is not uncommon for the young women of the maquiladora to turn to prostitution. The presence of hunger and prostitution indicate that the wages in a maquiladora offer little economic independence for the women who work in them. The reason why I'm reading about the maquiladoras, which it seems like to be a subject that is not related, is because for me it's very related because what I mentioned before, that these women are young women who come indigenous, who come from the countryside, who probably most of them were growing corn, and suddenly they are not able to anymore because of the transgenics coming that are taking over the markets because it's cheaper. Supposedly gonna end poverty, the GMO. But actually it's not, because every year the farmers need to buy new seeds from Monsanto. And these seeds have a bacteria in them that that's why they supposedly are better, that the animals that eat the corn don't eat the corn. But then you need to put a lot of also chemicals and pesticides to it. So you need to buy this from Monsanto also. So your whole cosecha, your whole cultivation depends on Monsanto when you are actually the producer of corn and you have been making corn for 9 times a year. So it doesn't make any sense. Also, GMOs produce cancer and other sicknesses and produce poverty instead of not producing poverty. So I just wanted to bring this up. I know most of you already are aware of this, but just to show how we consume food, how we see food, and how conscious we are about food indicates if we are participating or not in these kind of things, like these murders. Because maybe you don't care, you go to the shop and buy all these corn things, because almost every product that is, these packaged products, they have corn, which is GMO corn, they have soya, which is GMO soya. They have, all these things are GMO. And where does it come from, really, right? And so how do we, maybe not only here, but I'm talking about Mexicans, I'm talking about people everywhere in the world, how do we participate in genocide, and ecocide? How we are part of it, by just taking things lightly. Like, oh, I'm just eating, it's normal, this is cheap and poor, or things like this. But now we are gonna serve you, or, well, you can come and, is it ready? But they can come for the arepitas, or not yet.
Maybe you read it and we start at the end.
Okay. So, we didn't want it to end up on a sad note, because we are hopeful and optimistic. Despite all. And we believe a better world is possible, like really honestly. And I think that if we put ourselves into it, we can change the world by acknowledging what we already have, instead of trying to make new things and all the time and changing everything. So this is a speech by Mayor Ana María. Detrás de nosotros estamos ustedes. And it was in Mexico. She gave it in Mexico, in Chiapas, in 1996. This is 2 years after they went into the mountains, took up arms, and 2 years after the Nafta, the free trade agreement. Brothers and sisters from Asia, Africa, Oceania, Europe, and America, welcome to the mountains of the Mexican Southeast. We want to present ourselves. We are the Zapatista Army of National Liberation. During 10 years, we were in the mountains, preparing ourselves to make a war. Inside these mountains, we built an army. Down in the cities and in the states, we didn't exist. Our lives were worth less than the machines and the animals. We were like stones, we were like plants that are in the road. We had no words, we had no faces, we had no name, we had no tomorrow. We didn't exist. For the power, the one that today dresses itself globally with the name of neoliberalism, we didn't used to count, we didn't used to produce, we didn't used to buy, we didn't used to sell. We were a useless number for the accounts of the great capital. Then we went to the mountains to look good for ourselves and to see if we could find relief to our pain of being forgotten stones and plants. Can you put the next? Please. Here, in the mountains of the Mexican southeast, our deads live. Many things know our deads that live in the mountains. Their dead spoke to us and we were listening. Little boxes that speak told us about another story that comes from yesterday and points towards tomorrow. The mountain spoke to us, the Masewalop, we who are common and ordinary people. We who are simple people, like the powerful ones say. Every day and its nights that drag wants the powerful to dance to us the extol and to repeat its brutal conquest. The Cas de Sul, the fake man governs our lands and has big war machines that, like the book that is half puma and half horse, share the pain and the death among us. The fake that is the government sent us to the Alusop, the liars that cheat and give forgetfulness to our people. Because of that, we became soldiers. Because of that, we keep being soldiers. Because we don't want more death and deception for our people. Because we don't want forgetfulness. The mountain spoke to us about taking the arms so we can have a voice. It spoke to us about covering our face so we can have one. It spoke to us about forgetting our name in order to have a tomorrow. This is what we are, the Zapatista Army of National Liberation. The voice that arms itself to be heard. The face that hides to be shown. The name that keeps quiet to be named. The red star that calls the man and the world to hear, to see, to name. The tomorrow that harvests in the yesterday. Behind our black face, behind our armed voice, behind our unnamed name, behind the us that you see, behind we are the same simple and ordinary men and women that repeat themselves in all the races, that paint themselves in every color, that speak themselves in every language, and live themselves in all the places. The same forgotten men and women, that the same excluded, the same untolerated, the same persecuted. We are the same you. Behind us, we are you. Behind our sky mask is the face of all the excluded women, of all the forgotten indigenous people, of all the despised youth, of all the beaten migrants, of all the jailed for their word and thought, of all the simple and ordinary men and women that do not count, that are not seen, that are not named, that have no tomorrow.